I'm going to tell you guys about the top 5 mistakes that you should look out for when doing a new PC build. So let's get to it. Hey guys, Tiago with Classical Technology here. Thank you for joining me for another video. Remember to subscribe if you enjoy my content. Smash that like button. Leave a comment below. I want to know some mistakes you've made building a PC and what you would recommend others to do. So let's talk about these top 5 mistakes. The number one is in any new PC build, regardless if you're doing air cooling or an AIO or even an open custom loop, remember to test your components before you close everything up and button everything up. It's very important that at least try to do a preliminary run if everything's new, you haven't tested things before, because every once in a while you may have a motherboard that's not good, maybe a CPU that has a problem, RAM, etc. If you wait to do this until your entire build is complete, you're gonna have a lot harder of a time because then your cables are in already, especially if you're doing an open loop liquid cooling setup. You're gonna have to drain your system in order to be able to take your motherboard out most likely. So in that case, you even more so have to be careful. Just test your components, put everything out maybe on the motherboard box, make sure it's anti-static and everything's protected. Put your RAM in, your CPU outside of the case, maybe your graphics card or something like that. Run the system, maybe even boot up Windows. Just make sure that nothing is obviously wrong and you'll greatly decrease the chances of a problem when you do this. The second mistake to be very careful of when building a PC, you have to remember that while most PC parts, especially good quality parts, are robust, a couple of things are going to be a little bit sensitive in that you can easily damage them. The first one of these are going to be the pins, like if you're using an Intel motherboard, or on the CPU itself if you're using like an AMD Ryzen processor. Now, I've even seen cases where you have like an air cooler on a Ryzen CPU and you try to pull it out, and since it's not in there quite as strongly as the Intel CPU is in terms of the socket, you can actually pull out the air cooler with the CPU, and if you're not careful, you can bang up the other end of that CPU on your case and bend all your pins, and you're going to damage your CPU. So to avoid doing that, be extra careful. Anytime you're placing your CPU in the socket, if you're doing Intel, be careful with your CPU, but be even more careful with your motherboard because that's where the pins are. If you bend a couple of pins, it may be possible to bend them back if you're very, very careful, but there's a good chance you're going to damage something or even pull a pin out. So you want to avoid this scenario under any circumstance, because if you have a bad pin, sometimes you may be able to boot, but you're going to have different errors, like maybe your RAM isn't going to be recognized the way it should. You may have instability problems. So this is definitely one of the huge mistakes you want to avoid. Remember to be extra careful around either your motherboard socket if you have Intel or your CPU pins if you have Ryzen. Let's talk about the third PC building mistake, and this one's going to have to do with cable management. Now, usually cable management is more about aesthetics, but if you don't manage your cables properly, there's a good chance that they're going to run up against maybe your CPU fan, your GPU fan, especially if it's in the back of the case, even your power supply. If you have a cable that's going in all type of directions, you may stop the proper airflow, and you may also impede a fan from flowing properly because that's going to be right up against that fan. So you have to be very careful with your cable management, and it's not only about the airflow. When you have a lot of cables jumbled up, let's say if you pull on one end, it may pull everything, and you may even damage some more sensitive parts of your motherboard. For example, different pins, like the one that connects to your case where you have to turn your computer on, those are very easy to bend. Even RGB connections, they're very, very easy to damage and bend. If all the cables are jumbled up, you're going to pull on something. Let's say you need a little more leeway for your GPU cable. You may pull that RGB cable out and bend it and damage your motherboard. So you have to remember to be very careful with your cable management and make sure everything sort of has free access and nothing's being pulled too tightly. The fourth mistake in PC building is rushing everything and not plugging everything in correctly. A whole lot of problems can actually be solved by just making sure that your motherboard is properly set on its standoffs, your RAM is in, there's no sort of wiggle movement. Make sure your GPU is all the way into that PCIe slot. I've seen a lot of systems that won't boot just because the graphics card isn't completely in. You should hear a little click, often that little thing on the motherboard. Of course, make sure your CPU is carefully placed. Make sure all your cable connections, especially the little cables that go from your case to your motherboard that allow you to turn the system on, make sure that's all connected. So be extra careful when you're connecting these components, because it's very easy to leave the RAM a little bit loose, or even your CPU not properly seated, or even your GPU, and these are going to give you a lot of issues. So this is a very easy mistake to avoid if you just take your time. The fifth and final PC building mistake is that a lot of times people are going to build a PC and they may go well and they're going to leave it alone for a few weeks or a few months and they completely forget about it. Now, for a PC to stay running really well and at the top of its game, it's going to need maybe some type of maintenance as the months go by and the years go by. This may be as simple as cleaning the dust, but an excess of dust buildup may just slow down your components, make everything hotter. So that's something that you definitely want to address. And you may also have other issues with your hardware that you either notice or they pop up throughout time. So you may have to adjust your PC, and there's nothing wrong with going back in and rebuilding things, maybe redoing the cable management to give you better access. So definitely, I think it's a good idea for once in a while you open up your PC, you sort of, redo the cable management, bring it up to the next level aesthetically, because that's just going to make maintenance a whole lot easier. You're going to be able to see stuff, and when you look at your cables, you're going to feel better about yourself, giving you a little bit of a better mood when you're working on a problem that may have popped up. So if you do your PC build and you just let it run for months without checking in, even if you have a couple of problems and you don't fix it, eventually it may get worse if you have a serious issue. So one of the big mistakes that I'm talking about here is just ignoring your build after you've done it. You may check it and there may be nothing wrong, or sometimes a cable may come loose, or you may have some type of connection that's not working. So it's very important, even months after your build is done, to once in a while just check in on it, make sure nothing's loose, make sure your initial build was good. Sometimes a cable will be in there, but over time, maybe a little bit of movement on your floor, you may have a cable come a little bit loose. So maintenance is very important. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe if you like my content. Smash that like button. Leave a comment below. I want to know about some mistakes you've made building a PC and what you would recommend others do to avoid it. All right, so I'll see you guys on the next video.